Have you ever spent days working on a project in your backyard, only to watch the weather completely threaten to destroy it in a matter of minutes? Today, we are talking about the ultimate test of a gardener's patience. We are looking at the incredibly popular do-it-yourself greenhouse, made entirely out of plastic pipes. Everyone says these are the best budget options for your garden, but there is a massive catch. What really happens when a severe storm rolls in with hurricane-force winds? I promise you, the results of this weather test will completely change how you view backyard structures. You might think that a cheap plastic frame would just fly away like a kite. Or maybe you believe that a well-built structure can withstand anything Mother Nature throws at it. The truth we uncovered is highly unexpected. So, let us dive into the chaos of the storm and find out what really survived. Do you think a plastic pipe greenhouse can beat a storm? Let me know your guess in the comments right now. Before we get to the winds, we need to understand the setup. For years, gardeners have been looking for cheap and easy ways to extend their growing season. The traditional glass and aluminum greenhouses are beautiful, but they can cost thousands of dollars. Enter the hoop house. This is a simple structure made by bending flexible plastic pipes into arches and covering them with a thick layer of greenhouse plastic film. It is affordable. It is relatively easy to build over a single weekend, and it works wonders for keeping tomatoes and peppers warm. But because it is so light and cheap, it has a terrible reputation for being fragile. The internet is full of pictures of twisted plastic pipes and shredded film scattered across lawns after a storm. So, when the weather forecast predicted a massive storm with wind gusts exceeding 60 miles per hour, we knew our little homemade structure was about to face the ultimate test of survival. The sky turned dark, the trees started bending, and the waiting game began. Let us start by talking about the build process and the false sense of security it gives you. Building a do-it-yourself greenhouse out of plastic pipes feels incredibly rewarding. You measure the pipes, you cut them to size, you bend them into perfect arches. It almost feels like you are putting together a giant set of building blocks right in your backyard. We used standard plumbing pipes, the kind you can find at any local hardware store. The plan was simple, but effective. We hammered long metal stakes deep into the solid ground. Then we slid the hollow plastic pipes over those heavy metal stakes to create the main structural hoops. After that, we secured a large, clear plastic polyethylene film over the entire skeleton. We buried the edges of the plastic deep in the dirt to keep the cold air out. On a calm, sunny day, this structure looked absolutely magnificent. It felt sturdy. It felt permanent. We walked inside and felt the warm, humid air, completely confident in our handiwork. We really believed that this budget-friendly build was a bulletproof solution for our garden. We completely ignored the fact that plastic is naturally light and flexible. We were so proud of our work that we forgot to respect the raw power of nature. Then the weather forecast drastically changed, and the reality of our situation began to set in. The local news stations started issuing severe weather warnings for our exact area. They were predicting sustained winds of 40 miles per hour, with massive gusts reaching over 60 miles per hour. The sky shifted from a cheerful blue to a dark, threatening gray. You could feel the drop in barometric pressure in the air. We stood outside, looking at our beautiful plastic pipe greenhouse, and a deep wave of anxiety washed over us. Let us completely debunk a common myth right now. A lot of people think that a little wind will not hurt a tight plastic structure because the wind will just slide right over the smooth, curved top. This is totally false. A greenhouse is essentially a giant sail securely trapped on the ground. When high-velocity wind hits a large, flat, or even curved surface, it creates incredible amounts of pressure on one side and a powerful vacuum effect on the other. It acts exactly like an airplane wing trying to create lift. We knew the storm was going to try its absolute best to rip our greenhouse right out of the soil and throw it into the neighbor's yard. The first major gusts of wind finally arrived, and the true test immediately began. You could hear the storm coming through the trees before you could actually feel it. A loud, rushing roar echoed across the neighborhood. When the first gust slammed into the broad side of the greenhouse, the entire structure violently shuddered. It was a terrifying sight. The flexible plastic pipes instantly bowed inward under the intense pressure. Imagine pressing your hand firmly against a large rubber ball. That is exactly how the side of the greenhouse looked. It caved in deeply and then snapped back out when the wind momentarily paused. The sound was deafening. The thick plastic film began to aggressively flap against the plastic frame, creating sharp, cracking noises that sounded like a heavy whip striking the air. We watched in absolute horror from the safety of our kitchen window. Every single time the wind hit, the greenhouse leaned over. It leaned so far that we were certain the pipes were going to snap right in half. The sheer force of the wind pushing against that large surface area was unbelievable. It was a brutal visual reminder of how fragile human-made structures can be against natural forces. This brings us to a critical part of the survival test, the anchor system. If your greenhouse is not securely attached to the planet Earth, it will simply fly away. As I mentioned earlier, we used thick steel stakes driven deeply into the ground. But when the ground gets wet from heavy rain and the wind constantly pulls on those stakes, the soil can easily become loose. During the peak of the storm, we could actually see the plastic pipes sliding up and down on the metal stakes by a few inches. The upward lifting force of the wind was trying to pull the entire skeleton straight up into the sky. Think about trying to pull a stubborn weed out of dry dirt. If you wiggle it back and forth enough times, it eventually comes loose. That is exactly what the wind was doing to our stakes. We were terrified that one massive gust would finally overcome the friction of the dirt. If just one corner pulled loose, the wind would rush inside the greenhouse, catch the roof like a massive parachute, and violently tear the whole thing to pieces. The integrity of the ground itself was being tested just as much as the plastic materials. Now we must discuss the tension of the plastic greenhouse film. This is perhaps the most important factor in whether a structure survives or fails. When we built the greenhouse, we tried to pull the plastic film as tight as a drum. We pulled it down hard and buried the edges beneath hundreds of pounds of soil. During the storm, this tight tension was both a blessing and a curse. Because the film was tight, it did not have enough slack to catch the wind and create massive pockets of drag. However, the wind was pushing against the tight film so hard that it created extreme stress points. The highest stress occurred right where the plastic film wrapped over the hard plastic pipes. We could see the film stretching and distorting right at those contact points. Imagine stretching a rubber band as far as it can possibly go and then rubbing a piece of hard plastic against it. You just know it is going to snap at any second. We watch closely, expecting to see a tiny tear appear. Once a tear starts in greenhouse plastic during a high wind event, the wind gets inside the tear and zips it open in a matter of seconds. We were praying that our plastic was thick enough to resist tearing. Let us examine the hidden weak links of the entire operation: the connectors and the joints. A pipe is only as strong as the fittings that hold it together. To build our frame, we used heavy-duty plastic cross-connectors and T-fittings. We used strong chemical glue to bond the pipes into the connectors. We also added metal screws through the joints just to be absolutely safe, and thank goodness we did. As the wind ruthlessly battered the greenhouse, the structure twisted and contorted in ways we never imagined possible. It moved like a giant, angry worm. If we had only relied on friction to hold the pipes together, the entire frame would have vibrated apart in the first 10 minutes. But even with the glue and the screws, we could hear loud creaking and popping sounds coming from the joints over the noise of the wind. Every time the structure swayed to the left, extreme torque was applied to the connectors. We fully expected to see a connector shatter into sharp plastic pieces, causing the entire arched roof to collapse inward onto our precious vegetable plants. The amount of mechanical stress those tiny plastic joints endured was absolutely staggering. The storm eventually reached its absolute peak, delivering the most terrifying moments of the entire ordeal. The sky was dumping sheets of heavy rain, and the wind was howling relentlessly. At this point, the wind was not just blowing in gusts. It was a constant, heavy wall of moving air pressing against the side of the greenhouse. The entire structure was leaning over at nearly a 45-degree angle. It looked completely unnatural. We thought for sure that it was over. We started mentally calculating how much it would cost to buy new plastic and new pipes. We assumed our tomato plants were already crushed beneath a collapsed roof. The visual of seeing this massive white bubble flattened against the earth is something I will never forget. It is fascinating how flexible plastic can be. A rigid aluminum greenhouse would have shattered its glass panels or bent its metal frame permanently under that same exact pressure. But the plastic pipe greenhouse just kept bending lower and lower to the ground, trying to let the wind pass over its curved back. It was a brutal battle between the flexibility of the materials and the relentless force of the storm. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the howling winds began to calm down. The heavy rain slowed to a light drizzle, and the sky began to lighten up just a little bit. It was time for the moment of truth. We put on our rain boots and jackets and nervously walked out the back door. As we approached the garden area, our hearts were pounding in our chests. We walked around the corner of the house to see the final result. And to our absolute shock and amazement, the greenhouse was still standing. It was not destroyed. It had not flown away into the neighboring town. It was right there, exactly where we had built it. The feeling of relief was overwhelming. But as we got closer, we realized that standing does not necessarily mean undamaged. The structure looked exhausted. It looked like it had survived a 10-round boxing match. The pristine, tight shape it had yesterday was completely gone. The whole frame had a noticeable lean to the right side, leaning away from the direction of the dominant wind. It was time to conduct a thorough and careful inspection to see what exactly had failed and what had held strong. Our first task was to find the specific weak points and assess the actual damage. We slowly walked around the perimeter of the structure. The first thing we noticed was the dirt line. The wind had pulled so hard on the plastic film that it had actually yanked some of the buried plastic right out of the wet ground. The heavy soil we used to anchor the sides had been shifted and displaced. We also found that one of the metal ground stakes had bent slightly beneath the surface. When we looked up at the arched roof, we saw that two of the main plastic pipes were permanently warped. They had bent so far during the peak of the storm that the plastic had stressed and turned a bright white color at the bend. They had lost their structural integrity. They did not snap, but they would never be perfectly straight or strong ever again. It was like finding a slow leak in a tire. The tire still holds air for now, but you know it needs to be completely replaced before you go on a long trip. The door frame, which we had built out of heavy wood, had also shifted, making it very difficult to open and close the door properly. However, we also discovered some very unexpected strengths during our detailed inspection. This is the part that truly surprised us and completely changed our perspective on cheap building materials. The biggest strength was the flexibility of the polyvinyl chloride pipes themselves. We originally thought that bending was a huge weakness, but the storm proved that flexibility acts as a massive shock absorber. When the wind hit hard, the pipes did not fight the wind rigidly. They yielded to it. They bent, allowing the structure to temporarily deform and spill the wind over the top, rather than absorbing the full blunt force. This flexibility is exactly why the connectors did not shatter and the entire thing did not explode into pieces. The other massive win was the plastic film. We had purchased a high-quality, heavy-duty, 6 mil thick greenhouse plastic. Despite the intense friction against the pipes and the extreme stretching forces, we did not find a single tear or puncture anywhere on the cover. The heavy plastic film proved to be incredibly resilient against the tearing forces of the violent wind. This leads us to a very interesting comparison between cheap, do-it-yourself structures and expensive commercial greenhouses. If we had spent $3,000 on a rigid aluminum frame with hard polycarbonate panels, the outcome of this specific storm might have been completely different and potentially much worse. High winds do not just push against structures, they carry debris. A flying tree branch could have easily smashed right through an expensive, brittle, hard plastic panel, ruining it instantly. Furthermore, rigid metal frames do not bend. They either hold strong or they break permanently. If the wind force exceeds the structural limit of an aluminum frame, the metal simply snaps or buckles, resulting in a total, catastrophic loss. Our cheap plastic greenhouse survived precisely because it was cheap and flexible. It was able to dance with the wind, bending and bowing, rather than standing stiff and fighting a losing battle. Sometimes, the cheapest and most flexible option actually provides the best defense against unpredictable and extreme weather conditions. It is a very counterintuitive reality. So, what are the ultimate lessons learned from this stressful experience? First and foremost, you absolutely must over-engineer your anchoring system. We will be adding earth anchors that screw deeply into the ground, attaching them to the frame with heavy-duty steel cables. You simply cannot trust soft dirt and friction to hold down a giant wind sail. Secondly, cross-bracing is absolutely essential. While the vertical arches survived by bending, the structure leaned sideways because we did not have enough diagonal supports holding the arches together. Adding wooden or metal diagonal cross beams inside the greenhouse will prevent that terrible sideways leaning. Finally, we learned that maintaining the perfect tension on the plastic film is a constant job. You cannot just bury it once and forget about it. You have to constantly check it, pull it tight, and add more weight to the base, especially before a major storm hits. Building a do-it-yourself greenhouse is not a one-time project. It requires constant observation, maintenance, and immediate upgrades when nature shows you exactly where your design is weakest. And there you have it. The shocking truth is that our cheap, flexible, plastic pipe greenhouse actually survived a massive windstorm. It bent, it bowed, and it looked completely terrifying during the process, but it did not break. The incredible flexibility of the plastic materials acted as a life-saving shock absorber against the brutal, howling winds. This goes to show that you do not always need to spend thousands of dollars to protect your garden from severe weather. Sometimes, a smart, budget-friendly design can outlast rigid, expensive structures. Thank you so much for watching and going through this stressful weather test with us. If you learned something new today and enjoyed the video, please make sure to subscribe to the channel and leave a big thumbs up. It really helps us out. Now, I want to hear from you. Have you ever built a backyard greenhouse? And if so, what is the craziest weather it has ever survived? Tell me your best garden survival stories in the comments section below. I read every single one. Stay safe out there. Keep planting those seeds, and I will see you in the next video.